back again here at allpointstv.com, and we are glad to see all of you out there ready to go. I'm ready to go, and we'll see what we come up with today. And if this is not the best program that you've seen on allpointstv.com, let me know in the comment section. No profane words to be allowed, but we like you to speak your mind, speak your mind here. We don't have any censorship here, and that's more than I can say for Facebook. But I will say this: Facebook and Google, it's amazing. I've learned you learn a lot about what's going on by what's not going on that once was going on, and that was the fact that it was censoring all of my articles leading up to the election. And now, I have to, when I was typing out articles that have to do with the election coming up, and that I had to worry about whether or not they're going to erase what I was writing. So I would write a paragraph, then I would save it. So if they took it off the screen, I'd have saved. But I notice now, it's just interesting how they are treating what I'm writing. And I guess there are a lot of other people going through the same thing. But primarily what it is that they're no longer trying to pull punches because the election is over. And I can tell you, they were trying to swing this election, and they were just going to let some articles come through and then not let some other articles come through. And I could tell what they were doing was trying to frame the narrative. And the narrative was that this election was close, and so that down the road, if they finessed the numbers and somehow the outcome would have been, which they plan to have predetermined, and it didn't go that way, they would have the cover, which was that their narrative was that the election was close. And I was showing that where I went, and certainly when I wrote the article about Donald Trump coming into Flint, I could tell by the and this is a Democratic town, and I could tell by the reception he got here that if you can get that reception here in this town, and this is one of the this is one of the strongholds of Democratic Party here. I don't think anybody would dare. I wear this hat now, but you wouldn't dare wear this hat prior to the election. I'm wearing this hat, "Make America Great Again." But if you could wear that hat today in Genesee County, and a lot of persons have kind of come on board. But if you were out here and being supportive of Donald Trump, and they call the guy Hitler, and this is the reincarnation of Mussolini. I mean, this is almost like a threat of your life. But how as the world turns, how things have changed. And so even you see these football players now doing the what do you call it, the Trump shuffle, and they're out there on the football field to score a touchdown. They're not doing that dance they used to do. They're doing the dance that Donald Trump does, and that's no longer not in vogue. And so I can now wear this hat without worrying about getting beat up in the city. But you can tell certain things are going on. I don't have to worry about my articles being erased right now, and I still take the precaution to keep saving it. After I get further down, I go back to saving it again and write a little bit more and save it so it won't get. So if it does get erased off the screen, but I have to tell you, I've noticed that they left my articles alone, and that tells me. So a lot of things you can get by what was going on that no longer is going on, and I can see now there's a change in the temperament. Now I don't think these scoundrels have changed, but they've got to at some point go along with the program because they lost, and they didn't. You can argue about how much of a deficit they lost by, but I mean they're arguing now about whether or not it was a landslide or was not a landslide. And you can say what you want to. This man got 312 electoral votes. You need 270 to become the president by the Electoral College. And that is what, 50 more votes approximately than what he needed. And so that's a landslide. And then because Donald Trump had anticipated the arguments that had been made in 2016 when he beat Hillary Clinton, and they were going to make the claim, well, he won the election because of the Electoral College. So he carried enough states in order to get the Electoral College vote. But I couldn't figure out at first, why is Donald Trump going in these places like New York, where he's having all these problems, and there was no way in the world a state as blue as New York. We kind of like on the two in between the two coasts, the left coast. It's hard to tell which one is the left coast because they're both the left coast. But California and New York, you couldn't figure out at first. I mean, I couldn't figure out at first, why was Donald Trump campaigning in those states, wasting his time, because there's no chance of turning at this point New York around or California around. Those are deep blue states, probably the blue states in the union. And now, well, things are beginning to turn, and you can see the changes that are being made. But the reason why Donald Trump did that was because in 2016, when he beat Hillary Clinton, they were saying he won the electoral vote. He still wasn't elected by the popular majority because Hillary Clinton got most of the popular vote. What Donald Trump did this time, they can make an argument they want to make. What Donald Trump did this time, and I see a strategy now. This man claims he's not a politician, but this man, if he's not a politician, he's a very good non-politician then, because he took that argument away from him as well. Because what he did, he campaigned in the states he could not win, and they picked up some of the popular votes in those states. He couldn't win the states, but the popular vote added up to the point that they could no longer claim they won the electoral college vote, but didn't win the popular vote, because the popular vote he won by 5 million. So he won on both ends of the political divide. He won the electoral vote, which is, of course, you have to get the small states, large states, middle-sized states, enough of them on the same page with your campaign. And brilliance of the framers who put that into the Constitution in Article 2, they were making sure that you wouldn't just have large states and you could become president and then just dismiss all the other states. You have to have some of those small states counted in there as well. And so the campaign has to be more general in the population. It's a brilliant design, and I hope nobody gets confused enough by these liberals talking about we need to change the electoral college, because that design is very well thought out by the framers, and it has a purpose for the way that it plays out, and that is that it plays out because, unbeknownst to the way these pundits are talking about it, the popular vote doesn't elect the president of the United States, but who does elect the president of the United States?
By the way, we've got a comment here from Shane Conway.
Okay.
Says, canceled Me Too. All eyes welcome truth they don't want. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. They don't see that the frame. See, I don't think you could come behind the framers, because number one, try to find. Okay, we looking at all the major universities here in Michigan, in Michigan, and let's see, there are 4 major universities in Michigan, and I'm saying major here. Any university that has the appropriate number of PhDs on it, those are major, because you can't be accredited without having so many PhDs in the departments and so on. So they're all accredited. Let me put it that way. They're all accredited. So, but the reason why we have the Electoral College, and there have been no scholars anywhere on earth that's been able to come behind the framers and put a document together that trumps the document that we have in place right now. They've all borrowed from it in the aftermath of the document being ratified in this country in 1788. But no other country or its intellectuals have been able to exceed what's written in that document, and they've all borrowed from it. The Electoral College is a brilliant idea because it takes a summation of a number of states to elect the president of the United States, because the president is not elected by the popular vote. But the question is, how is he elected? He is elected by the states. The states elect the president of the United States. And when I get into the appointment system, we're going to talk about how that's also a matter of the brilliance, but everyone, and this is everyone in the country has it wrong.
Like when they changed how senators were elected, instead of being elected from the state, they were elected by popular vote. That changed it. Now, some people could argue that was more reflective of a democratic process, or some people could say, but I mean, there. I think they had an idea about each state, the founders having just gone through trying the ratification process, and I mean the war and stuff, realized the distinctiveness of each state, and they didn't want to. They wanted people to have a choice to where they could live and what kind of possibilities for the governments and stuff like that, so they can move around and find one best suited their personalities. And the way they got the senators now elected, I think that eliminated that. I mean, it basically made it more uniform and more too easy to control.
You know what they need to do? They need to get off these framers back and stop trying to change and alter what they did, because when you change what they did, and they thought about this over a period of from May 25th, 1787 to September the 17th of that year, and this was well thought out by this country's first intellectuals. I'm quoting Ayn Rand here, and I agree with her on her assessment of these persons that were in that room in Philadelphia. And she said they were our first intellectuals and so far our last. And she's right about that. You try to find 55 persons today and to take any university you want to pull them from and put 55 of them in a room that are the best and brightest that you have. The best and brightest. That's the book by David Haberstam. And get the best and the brightest you have at all of the top-notch, quote-unquote, universities. And I'm beginning to wonder if there are any top-notch universities in this country today, based on what I'm seeing them do and what they're saying, and also what they're turning out as far as their graduates. But try to figure out who could go in a room for the almost, how many months would that be? May 25th, June 25th, July 25th, August 25th. How many months is that? July, August, September. Okay, that's June 25th to July 25th, July 25th to August 25th, and then the 17th of September. So it's almost 3 months. Am I right about the counting here? I didn't major in math. I don't have math. I don't. I'm covered hold in my field. But I think that would be a little less than it's less than 4 months. And I'm gonna say the starting date. I used to disagree with this. I have my own starting date. I think the 14th would be a better date, but I do understand why they say the 25th of May, because that's when they began to. They had a quorum before that, but they used the 25th because that's when they really got down to regular business, and that's when they started to choose the various committees. I want to talk about that too before I get off the air. The committees, because I couldn't. I had to understand something. When I was in those classrooms trying to figure out something beyond what was being taught. I couldn't figure out why some of the persons sitting in that room could have made the mistakes that they allowed to be made when they were personally involved in the deliberations. I couldn't figure out, for example, how it was that here's a good example. I couldn't figure out how uh, William Blunt could have allowed himself as a senator to go through the impeachment process without an objection, because you can't impeach a senator and you cannot impeach a member of the House. Let me go back to what John was saying a minute ago. The reason why you have the members of the House in the House of Representatives, see, it's called the House of Representatives, because that is a body that represents the people in the United States. They are their representatives. But what explains the Senate, which is a more supposed to be a more deliberative body that did not exist because the bicameral legislature did not exist under the Articles of Confederation. So, what is the reason why the Senate exists? Well, the Senate, you see, is a representative was intended not now after 1913 because of the 17th Amendment, but because they didn't know what they were doing. You stop messing with the framers of the country and stop messing up the uh, what they put in place here because you're not qualified to come behind them and say anything. These were the best and the brightest, and we don't have the best and brightest now. But the Senate was set up in a bicameral legislative body so as to have the senators represent the states. So the House represents the people, that was their body, quote unquote, broken down into districts so that the district would be represented by the population inside of the states. We have now in Michigan, we have 14. We're losing members in the state, so we now have 14 electoral votes. So we got 14 districts then in the state. But the state though would be the conglomerate of all of that, the people and the districts and all the rest of it, and their representation would be in the Senate. And what I was figuring out as I was sitting in those classes, I'm trying to figure out what is going. That's why I don't. That's why I was going beyond what was being taught in those classrooms because I could see what they were saying up there was wrong. Some of it was wrong, and I couldn't. You can't raise. You don't raise your hand. You don't raise your hand up there and say they're wrong because you say that. I don't care what university you were at. When I was in undergrad school, you couldn't do it. You couldn't. You could not contravene the academic integrity of the instructor. But I knew what they were saying was wrong. Some of it. And I will tell you this. The whole country is wrong on the appointment process. I'm gonna prove that today. Everybody in the country is wrong. On how the appointment process operates. I'm sitting in that classroom that day. I will never forget it. And what I couldn't reconcile was what the framers were doing if what the instructors were saying was their intent. On the one hand, to separate the powers, and that's undeniable because you have the separation of powers both on a horizontal and a vertical plane. Horizontal is the fact you have three branches of government, and horizontally they are separated into Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3, and that's the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches of government. That's a horizontal division of power. But in saying that you're going to have a limited government, where it's not just a limited power in each of the corridors of power of the government, but they have a limited government. You see, here's another point. A limited government and a federal system is really saying the same thing. Because in the federal system, the power is divided on two different levels, the federal level and the state level. And here's where the problem comes in for this country. I'm going to correct all of them today. Everybody in this country is going to be corrected because they're all off, and I'm going to prove it. You see, I couldn't raise my hand in that classroom, but I knew what they were saying was not true because I read. I'm. I read Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. I read that back in 1989. And I'm sitting in that classroom and I'm reading that and I'm listening to what they're saying. And I know that's not what that language says. I'm going to read the language to you, but I want you to understand something here. What I could not figure out, I couldn't figure out how in the world could William Blunt allow them to take him through the impeachment process if he was in the Constitutional Convention as a representative at that time of North Carolina. Now, later on, he'll become the senator from Tennessee, but Tennessee was not a state at that point. It became a state when we had increased by 2 states. We now have 15 states, and Tennessee was one of those additional states that had been added by the time that Blunt is now the senator of that state. But I couldn't figure out how it was that he would allow himself to go through the impeachment process when it's very clear that the Constitution does not allow for a senator to be impeached. How did that happen? And I couldn't understand that until I saw something else that I had missed. And I'm sitting in that classroom realizing that this is what they all are missing. They're missing this even today. All of them are missing it. And that's why they have misinterpreted Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. I'm going to read the language to you, but I'm going to explain what the language is saying. And it's not saying what they're saying is saying, and they have it wrong. They're not going to correct me. That I can guarantee you. They ain't doing that. But I'm gonna read it to you and tell you what that language is saying here. You have to understand the language first of all. And I can remember one time I was teaching junior high school, and I read something from the book. I had a great class that was a very smart group of students, 7th graders. They were very smart. And we had the English class in the same part of the building, the corridor of the building. We had the English department down there, and we had the social studies department down there, and they had the science in another part of the building. And those students, I read something that from the book, and it said I will never forget. It said the Chinese don't farm, they garden. Oh, those students got up in an uproar. Mr. Moss, that's not right. They thought that the statement was wrong because they didn't see that comma there. But they knew that when you say the Chinese don't farm, they garden. It sounds like what they should say is the Chinese don't farm their garden. But that's not what it said. It said the Chinese don't farm, comma, they garden. And that's a whole different reading of that passage and the meaning of it. But that comma is there for a reason. They're not talking about the ownership of the garden. they're talking about the intensity of the farming. They don't farm because you got 1 billion people to feed. Every plant is vital to the lifeline of the country. And the farming has to be intense enough so that the produce is abundant at the level it can be abundant, because any shortage will in fact cause people to starve. So they don't farm, they garden. They garden. You see them out there in the field, they are out there gardening on their farm. So the statement was the Chinese don't farm, comma, they garden. You have to understand what that comma is doing there. I just make that point because when I correct these scholars, which I'm going to do, because they got this language wrong, and the whole country's off. You see, what bothered me in that classroom in 1989, I think it was 1988, 89. Yeah, 89, I think it was. What bothered me in that classroom was that we all agreed in the room that Articles 1, 2, and 3 do a horizontal separation of powers on the federal level. That's what it does. It's a federal separation of powers. And it limits the powers because it puts each of the corridor of power, each point of the power divided in Articles 1, 2, and 3 in a separate corridor where the power will be germane to that particular article, and then Article 2 sets up another corridor of power, and Article 3 another corridor of power. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't limit the power. It separates it, and the separation of power and the checking and balance system and all of that will restrain it. But in the federal system, what happens is that you have systemic power operating on two different levels. And to have a federal system is to say it's the same thing as saying that you have a limited, to have limited government. A federal system is a limited government by design. That's why you have to understand this. In order to set up the federal government, which is what the states did, they set it up. The states set the federal government up. And because the child is not bigger than the parent, well, used to be that way in the household, but I'm not so sure it operates that way anymore. But the parent is supposed to be bigger than the child because it's producing the child. And so the states produce the federal government. So therefore, who's the daddy here? The daddy is the states, are the states. The daddy are, the daddy is, you could say the daddies are the states. The daddies are the states. Because they created the federal government. And in creating the federal government, they delegated what powers they are in fact delegating in the creation of the federal government. So they delegate the powers and they itemized what's being delegated away from themselves because the states did not want to have, listen carefully to this point here, did not have the federal government, which they created, to run askance and running out of control. So they itemized where the delegation, in fact, was. Now, I say there's a preface to Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. I have to say that because I want to tell these scholars something. In Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. And this goes for the Supreme Court members too, all of them. I'm going to read it very carefully to you. I'm reading the appointment clause, in the Constitution. And of course, the president appoints all of the civil officers of the United States. That's why in Article 2, Section 4, it says the president and vice president of the United States, the president and vice president of the United States, and all civil officers. Let me say that again. The president and vice president and all civil officers of the United States, and all civil officers of the United States. It doesn't say anything about senators in there. It doesn't say anything about members of the House of Representatives in there. It talks about civil officers of the United States. The civil officers are the persons appointed by the President of the United States. And that's why it's found in Article 2, because the Article 2 sets up the executive branch of government. And those persons are appointed by the president. Now, listen to this very carefully. There are two things happening in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Number one is that it starts out with stating a passive part of the appointment process. Just like, for example, when you talk about impeachment and you say the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Well, when you start to say that shall be removed based upon impeachment for and conviction of, that process at that point is passive because it's already occurred. The president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed at that point, but they're not impeached and convicted at that point. They're impeached and convicted in Article 1. Because Article 1 says in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, it says that the House should have the sole power of impeachment. In Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, it says that the Senate shall have the sole power of impeachment. That's all in Article 1. But in Article 2, it says that the president shall be removed, the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed upon impeachment for and conviction of. That process has already occurred. It's passive at that point. The process is already passed. Now, how does that deal with Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2? Here's how it deals with it. Let me read it to you. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. and here these persons are appointed by Donald Trump, and they got him going up there on the hill to get their permission after Donald Trump has made the appointment. Boy, how stupid can you get? You have a separation of powers, and then the president in the separation must get the approval of the Senate to put people in his own cabinet. If that would be true, and I'm sure it's not true, but if that would be true, then those persons that were taking Andrew Johnson to task when they did the flip side of that and said that they appointed Edwin Stanton to his cabinet, they approved the appointment of Edwin Stanton. Therefore, if they approve the appointment to Johnson's cabinet, Johnson can't fire him without the approval of the Senate saying that that's okay as well. So he's lost control of the executive branch of government. That's what they're teaching that at these universities right now. Here's what Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 says. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. Listen carefully to this part here. To make treaties, provided that 2/3 of the senators present concur. That's for them to act upon it now. If by the fact that it does something in addition to the permission. The first part of Article 2, Section 2 establishes the permissions that are being granted to the executive branch of government. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. That's just locating where the power the president can exercise comes from. The states is making sure that that the president knows that's the power that they've all given to the president. But it says, in addition to that power that he has that power already to make the appointment, to make the treaty, provided that 2/3 of the senators will agree with that. That's something for them to do now. Now I want you to watch this in that document, and this bothered me. And when I began to look at it, when I began to look at that, I saw what they were saying was wrong in that classroom that day. But I didn't say anything about it. You know why? Because because I had learned my lesson. I learned my lesson in undergrad school in Dr. Collins's class. I had learned to shut up. So I didn't say anything, but I knew what they were saying was wrong. Let me continue to read this language. And don't forget, it said, in terms of the active part, provided that 2/3 of the senators present will concur with the treaty. I wanted to ask those professors up there in front of that room. I didn't ask them. What happened to that provided that in the second part of that language? When you were talking about the appointment, where it says this, and he shall nominate and bind with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law but the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think fit. It does not say here that in the appointment, provided that anything else occurs, because the power is given to the president by the federal system, by the delegation of powers in Article 1, Section 8, the 18 clauses found therein. You see, the president already has been given the power through the separation. And to say that the president must go to others and ask for permission to put people in his cabinet, that destroys the separation. Because the president has to get permission from the Senate to put people in his own cabinet. This is ridiculous. No person that sits on the Supreme Court that should be allowed to sit in the Supreme Court, saying yet a separation of powers, but the president must ask individual members of the Senate to okay approval for members to go in his own cabinet. It would be saying then that individual senators can cast a verdict against an office holder in the federal branch of government that is a singular office holder in that branch. An individual senator can stop that. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. The president is the embodiment, the total embodiment of the executive branch of government. If he can be turned away by senators, they're now trying to cultivate the friendship of Trump's cabinet, Lisa Murkowski, people like Mamie Collins from Maine, Murkowski from Alaska. If Run was there, he'd be a problem. Rhinos in there saying no to the president of the United States in terms of appointing people that he thinks that he needs to have in his cabinet to carry out the promise he made to the American people. And they are okaying that in this country. These people claim to be representing the Constitution of the United States. That's what they claim that they're doing. They're not doing that because that language is not allowed for that. What do you scholars think about that? Not that I care what you think about it. I'm telling you that language does not say what you're saying it says. And that's not the intent of that language. But I have to ask myself the question, and I asked this question 20-some, how many years has that been? 90. So 2010. It's been 30-some years ago. I asked this question, how could those in that room, including Alexander Hamilton, because I read Hamilton's work on it as well. Hamilton wrote on this in Federalist Paper 45, 64, 74, 74. Yeah, I'm sure it's 74. And 75. I think 75 was written by Madison. So here are the two primary writers of the Federalist Paper. And I read what they wrote, and I couldn't figure out how they're picking up on this in that room. And here's what I wasn't getting is I'm sitting in that classroom trying to figure out how did that pass as the understanding in that language. So I had to so I began to interrogate that, and here's what I had to understand. I had to understand those committees. And there's something going on there in that room with those committees too. Because there's one committee called the Committee of 11. which met 3 times. That committee is mentioned 3 times in the writings of in the notes taken by James Madison and Yates of New York. And that committee of 11 met. The first time they met June 2nd, I think it was. And they were meeting about how to assess the number of senators the states would have. That's the first time they met. I wrote down something here that I wouldn't forget, and I could make sure I cover this as well. The first time they met was after then. Now, don't forget the first committee they set up, because it was the Rules Committee. That was set up with the Rules Committee was set up on May 25th. That's what most persons say, that the convention would have started on that date. You can't start without the rules. Say set the rules up on that date. That committee had on it 3 people. They had Hamilton on that committee. They had Thomas Pinckney on that committee, and they had Pinckney was from South Carolina, Hamilton from New York, and they had Charles White, W-Y-T-H. I think it's White or with on that committee from Georgia. And they had 3 members on the Rules Committee, so they recognized something about the intellect. Because look, they only had 3 persons on that committee, but they had 11 on the committee. 11 that was making some of the big decisions, and I can see in that they were sitting there. These were Masons. They were sitting there with a little bit of cheek. Because why 11? Let me tell you why. Judas is missing. That's why. And that committee met 3 times, called the Committee of the 11. They were very much aware it was Committee of 11. Why would they do that? So you have to understand what's going on in that room. You have to read between the lines of what they wrote. There were a lot of things going on in that room. That was a committee of 23. Their job was to, and that was their job was to look at the end of the process. That would happen on September the 12th, I think it was, when they would have met to look over all the things that had occurred. That would have been the committee that would have been like an organizing committee. They're now getting ready to organize all the work they've done. They had one committee set up where they were going over that which had been tabled, and that was work that had not yet been done. They had to be completed. So they got a committee looking at that. They had different committees. What I had to figure out at that time was, how are they allowing some things to go on, and how are they writing about it wrongly, being that they sat there. See, that's another thing you have to keep in mind. Sometimes you're so close to a building and being so far away from it at the same time. And what the far away part of it is that they broke up into committees. And there's nobody in the room on every one of the committees. William Blunt could not have been on that committee that dealt with impeachment, because if he had, he would have understood what the impeachment clause states. And he wasn't aware of that, because he allowed them to carry through the impeachment process, and he stepped down because they impeached the man. You can't impeach a senator. And you cannot impeach a member of the House of Representatives. Cannot be done by the document. And people write and say, well, we want to impeach Schumer. It's a nice idea, but that can't be done. And you cannot bring Biden to heal on the things he's done in that office once he steps down, if you don't impeach him first and then bring about his conviction in the aftermath of him stepping down from the position, because you can only impeach him while he's in office. He's going to get away with what he did. And he won't have to pardon himself, because everything he did in the presidential office, unless you take an action against him while he's in office, you cannot take an action against the president. And that's why you don't need anybody walking around here talking about there are certain things in which the president has immunity. He doesn't have any immunity. The word immunity is not in the document. They made that up. There's no immunity in the Constitution. Everybody is under the constitutional mandates. But you have to understand there's a process in place here. If you're going after the office holder that the population singly invests its vote in, he's the only office holder that we all vote for. We don't all vote for the senators of the states. I vote in the state of Michigan. I don't vote in Ohio. And those in Ohio are not supposed to be voting in the elections in Michigan, not supposed to. Some of them are doing it. And some of them are doing it from Michigan to Ohio too. Because you change residents and you don't necessarily change where you vote. It's a lot of cheating it goes on in this country. But the person that we all are supposed to vote for across state lines is the President of the United States. And that's Ohio. And the senators in that state were supposed to be the ones that would choose who their representatives were. The senators making that selection in the Senate. The states are sending 2 senators to the federal government. The senators are sitting there. And when the president is being removed, the states are doing the removal. 2/3 of the state senators, assuming each of the 2 senators from each state will vote the same way. 66 senators, 67 senators will be required for removal. And one of the things that people did not get when they changed the language in 1913, where the senators were no longer the representatives of the states, but the representatives of the people, the same way that the members of the House are. What they didn't do was change the number of years of the term. If you're going to change the way in which you choose the senators and make it the same way you choose the members of the House, you should change the terms at the same time. Peter Schiff is now jumping from representing California as a member of the House. He's now jumped into Feinstein's seat.
Now, what was the impetus behind changing how senators were selected, though? I mean, or elected? I mean, what changed?
The idea that they keep on talking about democracy. What they were doing, changing the senators were designed to be held to account by the states. I mean, the president was supposed to be impeached by the states, and what they did by changing the senators and making the senators a popular vote, they changed the representation the states had. They're not representing the states anymore. They were the senators were to be the state representatives. They're sent there by the state legislatures until 1913, when these progressives changed that. 1913 was a bad year for this country, because changing the way you choose senators in this country to make it a popular vote to choose them rather than having the state legislators to do it is unconstitutional. Why is it unconstitutional? Because the way in which the states were to be represented was altered. And it's because of the representation of the states that they, in fact, came together to ratify the Constitution of the United States, without which they would not have ratified it. That's why you cannot come behind that part of the language in the document and alter that, because that's the term in which they came together to create the Confederation of States in a United States. And keep in mind that the word United States is in fact pluralized in the constitutional document, which means that it was never intended for the United States to be considered one polity, but 50 polities. It's the United States of America, each one of the states sovereign in of itself. The sovereignty of each state is included in the United States. It's not the United States, which is a single sovereignty. It's United States, the plural. Why did they change it? Because they wanted to get the federal government from having to answer to senators who are speaking on behalf of the states and holding down, claiming the right to do so through state power. And what they did with that also, they made that a states' right issue and made the states' right issue a Southern issue. They had to do with segregation. So the claim that you're against states' rights is the claim that you're for segregation then, because they claiming that's what George Wallace was talking about, states' rights. But states' rights is how the document is set up. They changed the way the federal system operates in terms of the power. The president cannot go out of control. The states are supposed to be there to hold through the federal system the president in check. And that's why they keep going back and saying, as they say in this Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, they keep saying here, here's their wording. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. He has that power. But the power is with the advice and consent of the Senate. It's not to be given after he exercises the power. He's already got the power because he's already exercising the powers given to him. The president shall have the power is by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. That's how the power is being exercised by the president. By and with he does not have it on his own. He has it because it's given to him by the states. If the wording is to be read the way they're reading it, then the impeachment of Johnson was correct. I'm sorry it didn't play out, because if it had played out, we would have an answer to it. But they stopped the vote short of actually removing him from office. If they had removed him, it should have gone to court. We would have to see what the court would say about it. I know what the court would have said, because the court is on this mental derangement. But the Senate was making an argument here. If we have to approve the position of the members of the cabinet to sit based on the president's choice, then to remove them also requires our approval. That's the argument they're making. And the argument would be legitimate if they're reading this language, if they were reading this language correctly, but they're not reading it correctly. I'm saying that they're not reading it correctly. The president of the United States chooses members of his cabinet, has the power to do so. There's no caveat saying here, provided that. That language is missing in that part of that document. It's found there in the part of the treatise, because it says provided that. You see, they have the power, but provided that 2/3 agree with the use of that power. That's what they're saying in that article. All you scholars, go read that language and tell me I'm wrong. Ask yourself this question here. What happened to that provided that language? Because the provided that is active to the point where something has been done at the point of the treaty being ratified. The power is there, but you can only have that power finalized, because it says provided that 2/3 of the senators present ratified. That's active to something be done now. It does not say provided that otherwise in other parts of that language. Tell me I'm wrong. Because all of you on that other you're venting on that other island there, because you're not taking into consideration what that language is talking about here. The president has authority to make his own to choose his own cabinet, and he does not have to get the approval of anybody to put members in his own cabinet. Because if he does that, if that's what it means, there is no separation of powers. This is what George Washington was trying to get people to see in terms of them wanting to bring his cabinet, to bring him, in fact, before that body. They tried to bring George Washington before the Senate to, well, not so much to bring him, but to get documents from him regarding the 1794 Jay's Treaty. They wanted to find out what were the intercommunications going on in the executive branch of government, and Washington told them that they could get the documents, but they must go through the impeachment process in order to do it. Because you see, the impeachment process allows for the members of the Senate to get the information they need in order to see if the president, through the impeachment, should be in fact removed based upon the behavior. Through the impeachment process, they can remove the president of the United States. He's not immune. They can remove the president, but they must do so through the impeachment process. But if he can deny you the access to the information and don't turn the documents over, go and look at how they did with Richardson back there with Richard Nixon. If they don't impeach Richard Nixon, and they didn't impeach Richard Nixon, they drove him out of office through the media. Nixon had every right to demand that they not get the documents until they impeached him, and he did not do that because they had. So you go back and look at how they worked that out, and they worked it out by, in fact, making it too hot for anybody to support Richard Nixon. They told Nixon that if he come up for a vote on impeachment, they're going to have to vote for conviction of him in the Senate. Even his own party had to tell him that because it was too hot to handle behind that. But Richard Nixon should not have. The man had 49 votes from the states. 49 states voted for Richard Nixon in 1972. And 2 years later, the man is resigning because he didn't understand what the Constitution required, and it made him step down, even though the man had won by 17 million more votes than his opponent had, by more votes than any candidate had in the history of this country in terms of the disparity between the opponent and the other opponent. 17 million vote disparity, and yet the man is out of office 2 years after the election was in fact held because of a misapplying of the Constitution of the United States. That's what happened in 72, in 74. That's what I'm telling them right now. Make each one of those persons who are going before those members of the Senate, make them vote on it. Don't quit ahead of time, but make them vote up or down on those persons that have been appointed by the president. And then if the verdict is no go, that should be actionable in court of law, which we have to now have the court make a decision upon what that language means. We want the court involved here because the president has a right to choose his cabinet. You can't tell the president that he cannot choose the person that will carry out the things he promised the people to do if he got in office, and then tell him he does not have the right to the tools to do it with, and the man was voted by the whole people into the office. You can't do that. The Constitution doesn't allow it. But they don't understand the Constitution, so that's what's going on right now. I'm telling you, scholars, that is not allowed by that language. And if you disagree with that, we have a fight. I'm right and they're wrong again. And I want them to tell me, because they watch this program, I can tell that by what Levine did this weekend. Call and tell me where I'm wrong. Okay. So next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.